Bonjour and welcome back to World History Before 1500. I am your professor, Philippe Girard. In this section, we've been studying the origins of some of today's most famous religions, Hinduism, Judaism, and Buddhism. Today's topic is a bit unusual because it's only partly a religion. Some people would call it more of a philosophy, a vision of society, rather than a religion per se. Which kind of brings up the issue, what is the difference between a religion and a philosophy anyway? Maybe that would be a good time to pause the video for a minute while you ponder that question. The way I've used the term religion in the course, religion was supposed to answer some questions, such as where do we come from, what happens after we die, and what kind of moral norms should govern our society. Well, Confucianism sure provides some moral guidance, but it has little in the way of a creation myth or a doctrine of eternal life, because it is thoroughly grounded in the here and the now. Religions often invoke some supernatural power, a god or multiple gods, and that is not central to Confucianism, again, because it analyzes our secular world, not the ever after. So more of a philosophy than a religion then, which explains why Chinese people have also practiced Buddhism, or the traditional Chinese folk religion, in addition to Confucianism, so as to kind of fill the gap. On the other hand, Confucius did embrace the Chinese cult of the dead, which is clearly religious in nature, and has been adopted as a deity by some followers of Taoism, another religion in China. So there's that. But either way, Confucianism deeply influenced China, so we will study it. Anyway, the main prophet of Confucianism, or philosopher, depending on how you look at it, was, well, no surprise there, Confucius. Well, that's how he's known in the West. In China, he's known as Confucius, though I'm pretty sure that I butchered the pronunciation there. Confucius, to use a Western name, he lived around 500 BC in China, which is interesting because several of the prophets that we studied in the class, like Zoroaster, Zarathustra, and the Buddha, they both lived around the same time in different places. So there must have been something in the air around the 6th century BC. The life of Confucius was not the most interesting. He was a low-level bureaucrat, and he wasn't even particularly successful at it. His main goal was to dismantle the fortification of the town and his province because he saw no reason why local lords should prepare for war by fortifying the city against their rightful ruler. That was the way to prevent any future civil war. Well, the local lords did not agree with Confucius on the matter, and they kept the fortifications, and they managed to force him into exile. So after that, Confucius spent years wandering from town to town, trying to regain a position of authority, or at least to advise those who were in a position of authority, kind of a philosopher-king situation, and anyway, without much success. One good thing is that not having a regular day job, that gave him plenty of time to teach his disciples and write. And those writings were eventually collected under the title of the Analects, which is the central work on Confucianism. And then he died. So I don't want to be seen too flippant about the failures in the life of Confucius. He lived in a difficult era in Chinese history. Warfare was constant, rulers were notorious for their venality, their tyranny, so not a great time to be a public servant. But the historical context in which Confucius lived had a huge impact on his thought pattern. Because he lived through much social turmoil, his abiding goal in life was to promote social harmony, stability, and good governance. In the US, we tend to put a premium on individualism and liberty, and I think this comes from the nation's pioneering days, when many early Americans lived on their own in a sparsely populated landscape, so self-reliance was key. Confucius, by contrast, lived in a more densely populated area of the world where individual freedom was not exactly a luxury that he could afford. So instead, how to make a society function, that was his main question. The rights of individuals within that society, these were secondary. So how did he envision that society then? Well, instead of viewing society as a random collection of individuals like we do in an individualistic society like the US, Confucius saw all the bonds that unite us. what Confucius called Gen, Jen. We're not random. We're connected to other people. Maybe that guy over there is the king, and I'm his subject. That's a bond. Or maybe that guy is my older brother. Being siblings, that's another bond. Or maybe that person is my spouse. Marriage, that's another important bond. Or friendship, the bond between two friends, they were powerful according to Confucius. Of all these bonds, the most important one was between parents and children. Chao, filial piety. That is one of the most important duties of a good Confucian. Confucius himself is said to have mourned for 3 years, I think, when he lost his mother. So instead of looking at society like a bowl of rice, where every grain of rice just stands right there on its own, think of society as a piece of cloth, where every piece of thread goes above and below the other thread of the fabric, giving it strength. If one thread breaks or doesn't follow the proper pattern, then the whole fabric unravels. I'd like to note also that these relationships are not necessarily equal. A king sits above his subjects, obviously. The same is true for parents and their children. The philosophy of Confucius is rather sexist, so the husband also towers above the wife and a brother over his sisters. Age also matters. There is great reverence not just toward parents, but older siblings and the elderly in general. Those power relations are not one-sided. The fact that you are the king or the husband or the older brother, that doesn't give you the right to do anything you want. With great power comes great responsibility. Think of it as a paternalistic relationship, father and child. A father should expect obedience from his children. He can also expect them to do chores and care for him when he's old. On the other hand, the father has some duties, like feeding his children, protecting them, educating them. It's a two-way street. Same thing with husbands and rulers and older brothers. They have authority over their inferiors, but they must also protect them. This way, if everyone in society knows his place and lives as expected, you can expect a more smoothly functioning society. No more bickering between a husband who thinks that his wife is too domineering and a wife who thinks that her husband doesn't provide for the family. He should be the boss, but he also needs to be a provider, and everybody will be happy. Just to be clear, that's Confucius talking, not me. I'm more in favor of marriage equality. So it's a very conservative philosophy in the sense of conserving things, keeping things the same way. Confucius wanted the people in power, the king, the elderly, the men, to retain that authority. He was definitely not a rabble-rouser. One key tool to ensure the smooth functioning of society was Li, L-I, which you could translate as politeness or etiquette. If you observe the outward forms of respect toward your ruler, like kowtowing, then your ruler will feel respected, and conversely, that ruler should address his subjects with proper deference. That reminds me of the works of Alain, who was a French philosopher around 1900, and Alain wrote a book on how we can achieve happiness, Propos sur le bonheur, a book about happiness. And his conclusions were remarkably similar to those of Confucius. The French philosopher Alain noted that marriages can fail due to big things, like, a man who hits his wife or cheats on her. But more often than not, marriages unravel due to the little things, like forgetting your spouse's wedding anniversary or being grumpy after work. And those little spats can escalate pretty quickly. Alain called that effervescence. So Alain suggested acting out politeness, pretending. So the wife congratulates your husband on his new suit and tell him how great he looks, even if you don't really think so. Then he'll pretend to be interested when you talk about that meeting that you had with your boss, even if you could care less. And just by pretending, everybody will be happy. And I call that the gymnastics of happiness. Fake it until you make it, we would say today. So kind of like Confucius. Another central teaching of Confucius beyond Li, social etiquette, was the golden rule. Treat others like you would want to be treated. Again, an emphasis on respect, politeness, in order to achieve social harmony. And that rule exists in many religions. Other aspects of the teachings of Confucius were more uniquely Chinese, such as his vision of society. He believed that social classes were not equal, which shouldn't surprise you since the rest of his philosophy wasn't egalitarian either. So what were those social classes anyway? He thought that the best class of people ever were scholars and bureaucrats. As a university professor and employee of the state of Louisiana, I agree 100% with that. But not many people would. Eggheads, bureaucrats, we aren't exactly popular in the US. So why did Confucius place those two groups at the top then? Well, because he valued learning very much, hence professors, and he also thought that the society could not thrive without an efficient, well-run government, hence bureaucrats. So there was some logic to it, though I suspect that this great reference that he had for scholars and bureaucrats also reflected the fact that, tada, he was a scholar and a bureaucrat himself. Remember that religions can be self-serving. Farmers occupy the second rung of the ladder, which is rather surprising because in many societies, peasants are not highly valued. It's even a bit of an insult. But Confucius argued that farmers provided food, which is essential to our survival. They were very useful. Then came tool makers like potters and weavers, for example. A ceramic bowl is not as essential as food, obviously, but it's nice to have a bowl to put that food in. So tool makers provided a useful service. And now you can draw a big line. Classes that were above, they were useful. Classes that came below would be far less worthy of respect. These would be the non-producers, those who don't do anything useful to society. Think of actors in the Chinese theater. A play is fun to watch, but it's not exactly essential. Or merchants. They buy a can of peas, they mark it up 10%, and then sell it to someone else. They didn't add any value in the process, so Confucius had no respect for trade. Even worse would be non-producers whose added value was less than zero. Think of lawyers. They put an ad on a bus stop in the hope that people will sue each other. That's a dangerous profession because that would create conflict when Confucius sought to minimize it. Same thing with soldiers whom Confucius regarded with disdain. All they produced was war and discord and suffering. They burned buildings down instead of building them up. He longed for peace and harmony, and soldiers were the antithesis of that. His view of the military was very different from the many societies in history that placed soldiers at the top of the social pile, including the modern US, where veterans are highly valued and often get preferential treatment. Let's say that your parents ask you what you plan on doing after graduating from college. If you tell them, well, I want to work for the DMV or maybe teach third grade, they'll probably say, I guess, okay, that's a fine, safe job, but they're not going to be super impressed. Again, bureaucracy, teaching, these aren't valued in the US. Now tell your parents you want to go to law school to be a corporate lawyer or get an MBA to become a trader on Wall Street. Then they'll be impressed, even though these professions produce nothing tangible according to Confucius. They just push paper around. And there's a reason for this dichotomy on how we look at jobs. The main operative factor for Confucius was utility. He admired professions that augmented the public good. In the US, we judge professions based on how much employees make. A football player who makes $3 million a year, he's better regarded than a daycare worker when she makes a fraction of that. Even though the daycare worker, she arguably does more for the world in terms of usefulness. So money, that's how we define our social classes: upper, middle, lower. The more money, the better. And I've drawn this little table for you to illustrate my point. I arranged the main classes from the top down, so scholars, farmers, artisans, non-producers for Confucius. At the bottom, I wrote the guiding principle, which is, well, social utility here. And I did the same for the US. Upper, middle, lower class, money being the guided line. Recently, we covered Hinduism, which was also very hierarchical, and as you may recall, your karma, which is to say your religious purity, determined whether you were reborn as a Brahmin at the top or a Dalit, an untouchable at the bottom. Though I also point out that priests and warriors saw fit to place themselves at the top, so there might have been something self-serving about it. Later in the class, we'll cover feudal Europe, which had three main estates or social classes. The clergy, the first estate, that's the priest, the nobility, and then everyone else, the third estate, which mostly meant peasants back then. And the justification for the feudal system was birth. Nobles claimed that they descended from distinguished families and that they were innately superior as a result. Though again, you'll note that the same people who designed the system, the church and the knights, put themselves at the top of the pile in a way that was, again, self-serving. In case you were wondering about my social status, I'm the proud descendant of European serfs, peasants. And that's the reason why I look at all these hierarchies with a bit of cynicism. Liberty and equality, that's my motto. The French Revolution. Up with the heads. Social distinctions should be based on merit, not birth. Let's get back to Confucianism. You'll notice that so far Confucius made no mention of the supernatural. His philosophy was a secular one. But he did believe in a creator, God, broadly speaking, and he embraced ancestor worship. What does that mean, you might ask? Thank you for asking. In traditional China, your loved ones don't fully disappear when they die. Nor do they go to some distant heaven. Instead, they continue to hover around you like ghosts or protective deities, you might say. So it's an important duty of every Chinese person to pay homage to their ancestors, not just with a funeral. You also build an altar to your ancestors in your home, and you make offerings to them as if, in a way, they were gods, or at least intermediaries between this world and the next, your patron saints that protect you. So you can easily see the links between Confucianism and that cult of the ancestors. Confucius thought that children should respect their parents, filial piety, Chao. He also had much reverence for the elderly. So it's only natural that this reverence would continue after death and become the cult of the ancestors. Notice also that this is the one aspect of Confucianism that is clearly religious. We're talking about a belief in the supernatural abilities of your ancestors. The cult of the dead also provides an answer to the key question, what happens to us after we die? The answer here is we become quasi-deities, as long as we leave behind some devoted children who will honor our name after we die. So Confucius lived around 500 BC and didn't have much success in his lifetime, but his ideas profoundly shaped Chinese society in the centuries that followed, all the way to the Ming and the Qing dynasties in the modern era, up to 1911. If you ever wondered how come Imperial China is such an effective bureaucracy, well, you know the answer. The best and the brightest went into that field per the hierarchy of Confucius. And when those bureaucrats were in charge, they were expected to rule for the benefit of the people, especially farmers, by doing irrigation works, for example. Well, in theory at least. China has had its share of corrupt tyrants too. So Confucianism promoted good governance, learning, farming, and social stability. But it also had some drawbacks. A society that's too stable is stuck in time. It doesn't evolve. Sometimes you need a bit of chaos for things to change for the better. When we get to the end of the class, we'll get to the age of exploration, when Spaniards and the Portuguese headed for the Americas and Africa. That was a key event in world history. In fact, that's the dividing line between the first and the second half of the World History Survey. You might ask yourself, how come the Chinese were not the ones to explore the seas, trade spices, conquer colonies? After all, they had the technological know-how and the resources. In fact, the first great naval explorer in the world was Chinese. His name was Zheng He. But Ming and Qing rulers who were steeped in Confucian thought eventually put an end to those voyages because to them trade and colonial conquest were to be frowned upon. Remember, soldiers, merchants, they're bad. Plus, why should a sailor abandon his family for years when he should be home with his wife, with his parents? So Confucianism played an important role in holding back China at a key moment, the Age of Exploration. We'll get back to that when we study the Ming and how they stopped the Age of Exploration. In the meantime, let's review the key points for today. Confucianism is a philosophy/religion that emerged in China and whose central goal was to achieve social harmony by teaching people to fulfill the duties expected of their age, their rank, and their sex. So 2 moral lessons for today. First, be good to others, the golden rule. And 2, respect your professor. He's older than you, he's a man, he's a teacher, and he's a bureaucrat. A god, practically. See you next time.